How's it going, my friend? John, the basic expert here, and in this video, I wanted to talk more about sandbox games, and I wanted to talk about a couple different things. I made some tweets on Twitter, and I felt like the most annoying part of, and it's just typical of online discourse, and I'm sure it'll happen in the comment section below. It always inevitably happens, but I'm going to try and be as clear and concise as I can be within my own style of presentation. But someone always misconstrues what you say, or they don't listen. That seems to be a big problem in internet discourse, obviously, is just people not listening to what you are actually saying, and instead they always construct some sort of straw man about what they think you're saying. And I'll just come out and say, I don't know how much easier it is to explain the sandbox game other than rolling on the appropriate tables and getting the results from those tables and interpreting them in a way that makes sense to your game at the table as you play. So, for example, let's talk about first. Let's go through like what is prep for me in my sandbox games. Prep for me would be I'm going to construct a map, an area map that might be 6-mile hex, 24-mile hex, whatever size you want. I construct that. I populate it with some locations. I sort of randomly name them. I generally don't have much backstory to them. The most that I might do is I use my city generator, which I'll have a link to in the video description for itch. And it's free. That I do a couple rolls and I determine things like law level. What is a city good at trading? What is it import and export? What's its population? And so just the bare necessities that I would need to kind of build off of, because those are things that might affect the players and be in law level, what the economics is like of the city. Those are the things that seem to matter to my players. I also will try and think of things that my players might be interested in, right? So I build a map, I draw a map, for some of the key locations, I do some basic background information about those locations. And then I might try and think up where they're starting at. Where are they going to start at? Is it going to be in this city? And if whatever city they're starting in, I might flesh out a little bit more. I might add some factions into the city. I might add some political plot. This is the ruler of the city. These are his enemies. That's it. And I might come up with some general ideas that might be quote plot hooks for the players, right? So the Thieves Guild is looking to recruit people. The players might want to look that up. There's a mercenary guild or company being organized to do a military campaign for the city against another city. That's also something that the players might be interested in. A wizard is looking for an artifact. A nobleman is looking for an artifact. Maybe it's the same artifact that the wizard is looking for. Now there's competition between the two. That's this, and what I'm talking about here, this video is already like 3-4 minutes in. That's it. I don't flesh it out much more than that. I might pick a name for the wizard. I might pick a name for the noble, the ruler of the city. Who's going to be hiring the players if they pursue that? I might make that up on the fly even. And I seriously just roll on tables while the game is going, and I improvise while the game is going in order to build the game as we go. Sometimes I use modules. I like the old school modules. Currently, like I'm using Palace of the Vampire Queen. I use some of the basic fantasy modules because they're very good, like plug and play anywhere you need to put them, and there's already like tons of prep already done for you there, and you can sort of change those adventures to suit your needs because they're so simple. They're more like, to me again, toolboxes rather than these pre-written narrative adventures. So look, this video is almost 5 minutes in, and if however much time it took to build the map and then to think about these things and write them down, that's how much time it takes. If they're going to delve into a dungeon, I'm going to use the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons dungeon generator in the appendices. It's fantastic. It works really well. It distributes treasure and fills rooms with content very well. If you don't have access to the first edition one and you play fifth edition, the fifth edition DMG dungeon generator is fantastic, and you are able to generate that on the fly. Obviously, you want to be taking notes as you go. So seriously, that's like it. So that's the prep part, right? So what about the running the game part? And so for that, we need resources and we need the right tools in order to improvise properly. So let's talk about those. All right, for this next section, I needed to get some materials to present to you because I want to make sure that you understand exactly what I'm talking about here. And so I think the first thing you need, tool-wise, context-wise, is you need to read. You need to read books. You need to read Appendix N stuff. Get yourself some Fritz Leiber, right? This stuff is great. Read yourself some Howard and some Conan, right? Read these short stories and actually read them out loud. Read these books out loud sometimes. You'll see how these authors describe things, and you can increase your vocabulary and quick, because these pulp stories, the way they're written is very quick and concise and direct, perfect for the kind of narration you would need at your D&D table or at your tabletop to make your tabletop experience feel very immersive, descriptive, all that stuff. You're gonna get adventure ideas from these, right? Like I'm doing currently, based on Ilmet and Linkamar, I'm doing my AD&D game is very much set in a city within my setting, and it's been fun. Like they haven't even ventured outside the city. They're just dealing with the intrigues of the city, thieves guild, and the catacombs beneath the city, and sorcerers and undead and things like that. That just started with reading some short stories from Fritz Leiber. So you need to have the requisite sort of toolbox to draw from, which will be a lot of these pulp stories and adventure writing, and whatever your favorite fantasy or sci-fi novel, if you're running sci-fi, or if you're running a Call of Cthulhu game, obviously you need to read a lot of Lovecraft. You need to be familiar with the genre that the game is based on, I feel, in order to improvise within the rules properly. Because the rules imply setting, and the rules are very much influenced by Conan the Barbarian and Fritz Leiber and these sorts of stories. And you would just do well to do that. Also, I think Edgar Rice Burroughs is also another good recommendation to read as well. So once you have your sort of toolbox here of plot hooks and things like that you know, because they're based off of things you've read, you might want to flesh it out with some other things here. Like I'm a big fan of like older actual mythological stories that are not pulp, but from these things, like this is my Tolkien translation of The Fall of Arthur, and I have The Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun. You can draw from these different mythological aspects of your setting so that you can remain consistent. And then from that, like once you have all that, it's come to game time. You've read, or in your mind, you know, like what style setting you want to run, what the tone and the flavor and the feel and the vibe is. Once you know that, you need the proper tools at the table to help you do that. For me, it doesn't get much better than Scarlet Heroes. I don't care what edition of D&D you're running, whether it's an older TSR edition or 5th edition or 4th edition or 3.5, this book in the back, in the appendices, it's just a few pages. But if you watched my solo games, you know the kind of stuff that you have here. First of all, in the adventure tags, you have lots of different things that you can use here, like angry ghosts. Let's look at this, what it says here. The locals have done something to provoke the dead, leaving them to be plagued by furious undead and restless ghosts. Only by destroying the undead or resolving the offense can these wraiths find peace. Enemies, meddlesome necromancer or vengeful wraith or negligent priest grasping tomb robbers. Fiends, or friends, Ghosts, surviving relative, distressed cemetery keeper, local priest, inquired magistrate. So you're getting NPC ideas here. Things, lost family heirloom, plundered tomb goods, treasure of disputed ownership, ancestor tablet, complications. The ghosts want something horrible. The ghosts are mistaken in their anger. The locals blame the wrong cause, some worship of the angry dead as gods or use them as tools, and places. This is where your adventure is going to take place. Neglected temple, desolate cemetery, ancestral family dwelling, site of a terrible crime. Again, these are things that you can use in your beginning prep too, to sort of sprinkle out these rumors for your players to pursue in the sandbox game, and it's always going to be a curating thing. Of course, you might throw out all these things, and your playgroup might be, we want to just do adventuring and exploring and see what's out there. And if we run into some of this stuff, what I'm explaining to you will be able to help you deal with that kind of thing too. So Scarlet Heroes has that, and you can actually roll for them here based on where they are. So they have urban, wilderness, and dungeon, and you'd roll a d6 and then a d20 in order to get what you would want to do. And further on here, there's like NPC generators within this that will generate race. Let me see if I can get to it here. Yeah, so quick NPC generation, you got character names, NPC creation, like their family situation, their age, their source of influence, their most noticeable appearance trait, their most powerful motivation, their engaging attitude or temper. And then you got the solo gaming rules here. And again, this is like at the end here, and it's just a few pages. But you have solo gaming rules for general oracles. If you don't know what's going on, and I often use, for instance, the general oracle here, my players may ask me something like, does this NPC, for instance, know what is offending the ghosts in the cemetery? And I might say, well, it's a priest. Maybe it's likely. So I would roll on the likely table, which means no on a 1 to 3, no but on a 4 to 6, yes but on a 7 to 10, and yes on 11 to 20. I would roll, and I would interpret the roll based on what I get here. You got tables for what the weather is like, how far away is this thing. You have oracular adjectives and motivations, which are things like honor, hunger, ignorance, illegality. So if the characters have a question about an aspect of something, then you can roll on these tables, and you'll get information, and you can use it. You can seriously show up to a table again with the basic prep that I outlined at the beginning of this video, a map and some factions and some NPCs, and that's it. And use these to flesh out the game world as the players go. You have dungeon generation in these as well. You have wilderness adventures, so you can use the wilderness adventure rules in these in any OSR game. So this is just a fantastic tool, and the link to this will be in the video description below. Again, I also highly recommend the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. This book is great. You have a fantastic dungeon generator. You have magic items. You have random encounter tables. These non-player character tables in the back is very similar to the Scarlet Heroes ones, where you can roll for facts tables about like their alignment, their wealth, their appearance, their nature, their disposition, their height and weight, the armor they're wearing. You have reaction rolls, you have their languages, you have their interests, you have their energy type, so things like lazy, normal, energetic, driven, slothful. Morals, they could be lusty, immoral, amoral, perverted, sadistic, depraved, ascetic, virtuous, normal. Honesty, you can roll how honest they are. You have hireling information. You have morale rules. You have all the stuff here just at the back of the book in 4 pages that is like more dungeon master information than what a lot of 5e players get. You have room descriptions and within this that I think that a lot of the 5th edition stuff took notice from, that you can roll on, or you have examples of. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah. Unexplained sounds and weird noises that you can roll, the air currents and odors, general description, you have the air quality, You have magic user furnishings, general description of container contents, religious articles and furnishings, food and drink, clothing and footwear, condiments and seasonings, even furniture and appointments in general. Like if they enter a room and they want a description, you can seriously just roll on the table and describe the room based on this. The rules within old school D&D imply a sandbox game. They imply a game that is low prep, player driven, and exploratory. It does not imply, in my opinion, reading these rules, reading the BX rules, reading the rules cyclopedia. It does not imply this narrative game that is being sold a lot of players. And let me clarify. I'm not saying the narrative game is not possible. I'm not saying the narrative game isn't fun. I'm just saying that's not what the game was originally designed for based on the tools present within these books. Again, if you're having fun with the narrative game, more power to you. But I have a 3-year-old daughter. I have a family. I don't have a lot of time to prep some epic narrative to run my players through. I don't have time to plan that the Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. I don't have time to plan for every eventuality in order to keep that narrative going and to make my prep matter. Because that's the problem. That's generally why GMs railroad, is because they spend all this time, hours before the game, prepping this adventure, prepping this campaign, prepping this every little aspect of this narrative that they want to have their players act out as a play rather than as a game. And then when the players when they go off script of what the referee or the GM, the dungeon master expects them to do, they get frustrated, and that's when the railroads come on. That's when the railroads enter the picture. Because I put all this effort into this prep. How dare the players leave it, and I don't know what to do out there. And it's not one of the eventualities that I planned for to bring it back around to what I need the players to be, right? That's a lot of work. And I constantly see when I talk about this on Twitter that like what I do is impossible. That the kind of game that I run is impossible, and I do it every week or every other week. I ran it on stream for people. I did Scarlet Heroes. I ran Victor Gorchev, co-hosts with me on Mondays. I ran him through him and my buddy Brendan, who plays in my in real life group in campaign. I ran them through some Scarlet Heroes games where seriously, I'm just using the tables from the book. I'm making it up as I go along. And it's funny when I get comments. I got comments on Twitter, for instance, like, well, I can tell it's not immersive for me when I can tell that the GM is rolling and just making it up on the fly. I just know that what I'm doing doesn't matter. And that is like the complete opposite of what the sandbox is. The GM doesn't know what you're going to do. He's rolling because he wants to make what you are doing matter. And God forbid the GM wants to explore the campaign setting with you, right? That's part of the fun for me and why I like sandbox games as well. Sandbox style games is because I love exploring the setting with my players. I like going into the dungeon with them as the referee and discovering what's in the rooms and controlling the monsters that are there. I'm rooting for my players when they find the treasure, or when they defeat the necromancer that lives within this random dungeon that's been generated. So you need to have the proper context. You need to have the proper like resources, toolboxes within in order to understand what the rules imply and the resources that you can draw from. And then you need to have the proper tools in order to run the game. Now, you might be asking, how can I practice this? Because this is something that takes practice. Like improvising on the fly is something I'm still not the best at, but I practice it. What's the best way to practice? I think if you want to learn the possibilities of a sandbox game with players at your table, the best thing you can do is solo game. And Scarlet Heroes is a fantastic pre-built thing that can help you solo game that will be compatible with your OSR games. Like if you're running an OSC and you use this, the world that you generate with this through your solo gaming will be immediately and with very little conversion translatable to your old school essentials game or your rules cyclopedia game or even your AD&D game. It will be completely translatable. So the time you spend solo gaming becomes prep time. The time you spend solo gaming functions as this multiple thing where you are prepping for your game, you're honing your skills, and you're becoming a better DM. And you're having fun while you do it and exploring while you do it. I enjoy the process of prep now. I don't get frustrated when my players veer off because there's no rails to begin with. It's just this game of reaction and between me and the players and each other, right? They do something and I, as the arbiter of the world, react to what they're doing and they react to what the world has done in response to them. And it becomes very much more their choices matter. So I got this comment saying like, it just doesn't matter. They kept saying things like, I don't like combat for just combat's sake. I don't like looting for just looting's sake. Like, this is what all sandbox games are. This is how you run a sandbox game. It's just go in the dungeon, loot stuff, kill things, take their stuff, and leave. No, these tools, these things, these everything here gives you tools to generate a story, but the story is emergent. It's not something that I planned. I'm just drawing from a big toolbox. All the prep time is up front. Before I start a game, all the prep time is just a few weeks, maybe a month of prep every now and then, because I don't have a whole lot of time, every now and then of building the bare essentials, the player-facing aspects of the world. And once I have that done, I have these tools. We just explore and we flesh out the details that I didn't plan for, because what's the point of planning for them? So I don't know. I hope that this makes sense. This is kind of a rambly, ranty video, but like, I just don't know how else I can simply explain the concept of the sandbox game to you and to people out there that don't believe that this is possible. Again, I have a family. I have a 3-year-old. I have work that I have to do. I have, freelance art commissions and things like that I'm always behind on and I'm always scrambling to get done. I have my own projects, my own books. I have my supporters for the channel that I have to make sure I make content for. I don't have a whole lot of free time to sit here and just write this story and railroads and rails for my players to be on. So I guess the final thing I want to talk about, I guess before we close out this video, is being the right kind of player. You need to have the right kind of mentality to be a player in a sandbox game. I kept seeing comments saying the analysis paralysis, right? That when players enter a sandbox game, they don't know what they're going to do. They just freeze. I've never seen this happen in any of my sandbox games, but apparently it does happen. I don't know if I've just been blessed with good players, multiple different players from going back over 10 years now, from many different play groups and many different people. I don't know if I've just been blessed with good players, but I've never had this problem with players, me throwing lots of hooks out there and them picking one, or even if they just decide to go off and explore in the wilderness, I've never had a problem with generating content for them. And then when they, for instance, are exploring the wilderness and they run across a damsel in distress, let's say, and she's been robbed by bandits and her husband's been taken. And now the player's like, this sounds interesting. We just came across this woman, her husband and all of her goods, maybe they're merchants, they've been stolen. I've only generated this on the fly. I can generate where the hideout probably is. And now the players are off on an adventure and a quest of their own choosing, of essentially really their own design. And I'm just there to arbitrate it. But the point I'm trying to make here is you have to be of the right mindset. If you are the kind of player that needs to have the GM tell you everything that you need to do, the GM needs to tell you to go rescue the merchant's husband and goods. You are just I've never met this kind of person that just sits there and goes, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I've never met this kind of person at the table. But you have to kind of be a leader. You can't be passive. You need active players. So if you are not an active player, if you're not capable of making decisions at the table, you're not going to do well in a sandbox game, or you're going to have to really rely on other players to make decisions for you. And I don't think you're going to be having as much fun, because I don't think you'd have much fun in a narrative game either, right? Like if the DM is doing the same thing with telling you what you need to do and where you need to go. And to me, that just doesn't sound fun. The way you need to think about it, if you're struggling with this as a player, is you have entered a fantasy world where this is, again, a sandbox, a fantasy world sandbox where you can go anywhere, almost anywhere, and do almost anything. You're limited only by your imagination. and the confinements of the rules of the game and the rules of the world that you're in. For instance, if you want to go on a killing spree as a character, there's probably going to be repercussions for that. But you as a character are in this fantasy world with some friends. What would you do? Like, I have a hard time believing that you are not imaginative enough as a player to not know what you would do in such a situation. You've been thrown into this fantastical setting with monsters and mythological creatures and subterranean tunnels, and you don't know what you would do? One final thing of why I like the sandbox game and sort of the procedural game, right? I feel like D&D was the first procedurally generated game. Like, you have video games out there like Minecraft, for instance, or a lot of these open world games where like they tout procedural generation. This one is the first and best and ultimate procedurally generated game, in that it has real human intelligence behind it, interpreting what it is, that can react in real time to what human players are doing. I think the confusion with the open game and the sandbox that we see now, likely Errol on the Gilded server pointed this out, is there's a confusion with it like with Skyrim. They think of open world game and they think like Skyrim or Grand Theft Auto. And while those games are very open, more so than like a more linear video game, the game devs still have to try and be like the narrative gamer, the narrative GM, DM, in trying to do a plan for as many eventualities that the players might do, and then hemming things in and confining you, where, you know, it's like that idea where like you get to the edge of the city and you can kind of see more beyond, but they have like that invisible barrier there, and your character, because of the programming, can't go beyond that point, because that's just the barrier of the game. You're in this walled garden and you can't get out. And sure, that can be fun, and I understand that people like it, but that's a lot of work. And that's a lot of stress, and there's a real potential for burnout within that. I think that's why there's a DM crisis within D&D, as it is right now. And so I think there's this confusion. They hear someone like me talk about the sandbox game, and they think of video games, and they don't really think of what I'm talking about here. Reacting on the fly. There are no boundaries. There are no limitations. If the players get to the coast and they find a sailboat and they find a crew and they want to go off into a whole area that is unexplored, that can be fun too. I don't have anything prepped here, but guess what? I have the requisite mythological underpinning, the stories under my belt to generate stuff on the fly. I have the tools. This has hex generation tools to do a hex game, a hex crawl in this new world that they discover. This has that too. So I can do it, and we'll probably have fun doing it. My BX Rule Encyclopedia basic fantasy game, it's kind of been this blend of a lot of different things I'm drawing from. A lot of different sources for that game. That game is past a year, and my AD&D game is going pretty strong. And I've ran multi-year games prior to this, you know. So, like, when I have done a narrative game, and it could be, I'll admit, I'm just not good at it, and I'm really good at the sandbox thing. I will admit that is entirely possible. But I think that learning how to do the sandbox game is easier for most people to grasp if they just sit down and do it than learning to do the narrative game is. I think the narrative game is something that is very complex and very hard to plan and do, and it takes a lot of devotion and time. And, you know, surprise, surprise, streamers do these narrative games. They don't do sandbox games because they have the ability. This is their job more often than not. Matt Mercer, it's his job to do the narrative game. So, of course, he's going to be really good at it, and he's going to put lots of time into it, more time than you and I probably have. You know, he doesn't have a 3-year-old constantly biting at his ankles, asking for attention and for gummy snacks. So, maybe he does. I don't know about Matt Mercer, and he might have a kid, I don't know. But you get what I'm saying. Like, this is a special situation. I think that we all like have read books. We all watched, even if you don't want to read books, watch movies, build a library. I'll end on the concluding points here. Build a library of whether it's movies, it can be movies and books, comics, whatever it is that you want to build this tone and style of your world around. Make a map about it, generate some NPCs, some factions, who's the most powerful wizard, what is the religion like in the world, The things that are player facing, just get some basic outlines of that. Get that written down in your notebook. You're done. Start playing the game, pick a starting point, start playing the game, use the random generation tools that you have available to you. Again, this book is relatively cheap. You can get it in PDF relatively cheap. The physical copy isn't that much more expensive on DriveThruRPG. You can get that, and you start going. Take notes. Notes are very important because you want to remain consistent. So, I mean, even the narrative DM should be taking notes of what's going on in the game. Do that, and I think you will have lots of fun, and you will understand the fun and the ease and the power of the sandbox game. But that's all I have for you today. Like, subscribe, and share if you like this kind of stuff. Tell me in the comments if you agree or disagree, or if I missed something. Again, this isn't necessarily to slam the narrative game. I understand that there's people out there that are really good at it, and I run it too myself. If I'm running a Call of Cthulhu game, I'm not going to do a sandbox game. It's going to be a more narrative-based game. But D&D, when I look in these and I read these rules, the rules seem to hearken to this idea of procedural generation, procedural play, and the role-playing comes about through what is procedurally generated as the players and the referee are negotiating with each other as to what is going on. That's what makes D&D fun. It's an exploration game, an adventure game. Call of Cthulhu is an investigative game. You're going to need to set up, for instance, clues and things like that in order to make Call of Cthulhu work. Maybe you can make a sandbox Call of Cthulhu game work, but it's going to be kind of hard, I think. The rules do not imply a sandbox game in the like I feel old school D&D does. So tell me what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What are some of your influences for your world? For instance, what are you basing your setting on? What kind of, if you do solo gaming or if you do sandbox games, what are some resources that you do? Do you have your own like tables that you've built? That's part of your early game prep that you can do. If you don't want to get Scarlet Heroes or use first edition, you can generate your own oracles. You can generate your own random tables that are curated for your setting. So do you do that? Let me know in the comments. I want to know. Again, like, subscribe, and share if you want to support the channel. I'm on Subscribestar. You can support here on YouTube or on the Guilded server. Guilded server is a hop in place. Link is in the video description. That's all I got for you this week. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.